since Donald Trump was sworn in as the president of the United States in his second term. And now we have a look at what Americans think of the work he's done so far and their concerns about what he hasn't done. CNN senior data reporter Harry Enten here in Fine Fettle. Harry, a CNN poll released some numbers. I know you like to look at things across many, so an aggregate of many different surveys. What are you seeing?
What are we seeing? The CNN poll looks a lot like the other polls that were out. Let's not make a mistake. The last day and change has been the worst day of polling for Donald Trump during his entire second term in office. What am I talking about here? Take a look at Trump's net approval rating. CNN, you see it on this side of the screen, -5. Gallup, -6. Ipsos, -7. Quinnipiac, -4. Negative, 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 underwater, 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 underwater. These four polls, all of them tell a consistent story, and that is Trump is on the negative side of the ledger. His net approval is negative. He is underwater like the Little Mermaid.
All right. What are the changes since the beginning of his term? January.
Right. All right. So we don't have a CNN poll to compare, but we do have the other three pollsters that we can look at. Trump's net approval rating, the change since January. Look at this. Gallup, down 5 points. Quinnipiac, down 7 points. Ipsos, down 13 points. They polled right at the beginning of his presidency, so not a big surprise that shows the worst change for Donald Trump. But the bottom line is this. Across the four new polls that we have, all of them have Trump in net negative approval rating, and the three in which we have a trend line, we see Donald Trump heading in the wrong direction, swimming upstream, you might say.
What is driving this? Like, what is making people so upset?
Yeah, you know, one of Donald Trump's great strengths during his first term, one of Donald Trump's great strengths during the 2024 campaign was the economy, the idea that Donald Trump could fix the economy. This was one of Donald Trump's great strengths. Now it's one of his great weaknesses. What am I talking about? Trump's net approval rating. You go back to his first term, February 2017, Ipsos, he was at +16 points on his net approval. Quinnipiac, +6. Look at where he is now in Ipsos. He's 8 points underwater on the economy. Quinnipiac, 4 points under on the economy. I honestly never thought I'd see the day in which Donald Trump would be polling so poor on the economy, but that day is here. As I said last week, inflation ate the Joe Biden presidency alive, and right now it is very much the case that Donald Trump is in danger of inflation eating his presidency alive because his net approval ratings on the economy are underwater.
I just have one last question. What's this for?
What's this for? If I wanted to say something,
math?
if I wanted to do math, if I wanted to write my name, if I wanted to do whatever, this is what we have the blackboard here for, and I can say Harry plus Sarah.
Your girlfriend and my husband will be very annoyed. Okay, thank you so much, Harry Enten. I should never have asked.
There you go.
John.
Glad it wasn't me standing there today. All right, with us now.
Steve, why don't you've got charts on this? Set the scene for us on just how big the national debt problem is at this point.
Yeah, Mika, before we delve into the details of the House package, let's just remind ourselves and everybody just how bad this problem already is before we get to anything else that might happen. So here's the federal budget deficit going back to 2018, and you can see we were down here in the 500 billion to trillion range, and then COVID hits, fine, the deficit jumps up. We would all expect that, and that's what government's here for. It did drop down again, but now it is on this relentless rise, and these are projections, the green bars, going all the way out here to over $2.5 trillion of deficits a year. This is not how it is supposed to work. When things are relatively good and the economy is growing, we should be having a lower deficit and saving our firepower to use when we have a problem. That's not what's happening here at the moment, even before you get to any of the president's new proposals. That, of course, has led to a lot more debt. We now have over $30 trillion of debt. For the first time in our history, except World War II, we will have debt that's equal to 100% the size of our economy. It's gone up under Republican presidents and Democratic presidents, but the scorecard over the last 40 years, out of curiosity, is $14 or so trillion added under Republican presidents, about $12.5 trillion under Democratic presidents. So there are not clean hands on either side. And then given the size of those deficits, not surprisingly, the debt will continue to rise sharply and well exceed the rate of growth of our economy.
Okay, so if you could explain to us how the GOP plan would work, take us through the numbers.
So what the House approved yesterday is what, as you said, Trump likes to call one big, beautiful bill. It encompasses all of the things they're trying to get done. There are some various complicated parliamentary reasons why it actually needs to be in one big, beautiful bill, but whatever. So the signature piece of it, of course, are tax cuts, and I'll talk a bit more about those later, but up to $4.5 trillion of tax cuts over the next 10 years. And then spending increases, a few spending increases for their priorities. Judiciary and Homeland are both basically border-oriented spending. And then defense, which both parties, to a considerable degree, need to have spent more on them. So roughly $300 billion more spending. But then they're talking about cutting a lot of spending. And so the Energy Commerce Committee is tasked with cutting $880 billion worth of spending. It's expected that that could be heavily out of Medicaid, could represent about 10% of our Medicaid spending. And so they're very focused on spending on Medicaid. But there's another guy who's not so focused on Medicaid. Take a listen.
Look, Social Security won't be touched. Other than if there's fraud or something, we're going to find it's going to be strengthened, but won't be touched. Medicare, Medicaid, none of that stuff is going to be touched.
Nothing.
You don't have to. Now, if there are illegal migrants in the system, we're going to get them out of the system and all of that fraud, but it's not going to be touched. We're going to love and cherish Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. We're not going to do anything with that other than if we can find some abuse or waste, we'll do something, but the people won't be affected. It'll only be more effective and better.
So this wasn't a campaign promise. This is stuff he said since he's been president, contradicting what the House is doing. So it's going to be a very interesting process on Medicaid, which is obviously a very sensitive subject. And by the way, programs like Medicaid, like food stamps that he's talking about cutting as much as 20%, the House talking about cutting as much as 20% of, red states actually get a disproportionate amount of this money. So it's going to be interesting to see how Congress people hear what they hear in their districts and what they say. Student loans, another big target, could cut about 10% out of student loans. And then there's another $500 billion of unspecified spending. 62 of it would be what's called oversight. Those are federal pensions. So he's talking about cutting, they're talking about cutting $50 billion out of federal pensions. But when you add all this up, the administration, which says it's going to reduce the deficit, actually has a plan to increase the deficit by $2.8 trillion over the next 10 years. And so if you look here, this is the same chart we just looked at. You add in these new deficit increases, and you can see that instead of even dropping for a couple of years, it doesn't drop at all, and it just goes up further and further.
So lastly, Steve, you're going to show us how the GOP tax cuts favor the rich.
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff in the tax part of this, and basically what they want to do, the central part of it is extending the tax cuts that were voted in 2017 that would expire at the end of this year. It was another bit of budget gimmickry, would expire at the end of this year absent a renewal. But those tax cuts are what we call highly regressive, meaning they favor the wealthy substantially over the less wealthy. So people in the lowest 20% of the economy would get a 0.6% increase in their after-tax wages under this plan, and people all the way up through the 80% below the top would get still 1.4% or less. When you get up here, the top 20%, the top 1%, you see the percent increase they get in their after-tax income. Let's turn that into dollars. If you're down here, you're going to get $1,000. You might get $1,900 if you're close to the top. The top quartile gets $9,000. The top 1% gets an average of $70,000.
Times senior political correspondent Maggie Haberman on the domestic front of all of this. I think this is one of those situations where shocking but not surprising really fits what we are watching play out.
Yeah, if anyone is surprised, they haven't been paying attention, not just for the last several years, in the interregnum between when Trump was last in office and when he is now, but the campaign in 2015 and 2016, where he was very skeptical of Ukraine, where he was talking about Russia's annexation of Crimea as something that some Ukrainians actually liked, which was just not true. He was always very skeptical of NATO and the alliance. That should not be a surprise. And he has been talking about, he has a very mercantilistic approach where he has been talking about foreign countries ripping off the U.S. for a long time. And he admires strongmen, and he admires Vladimir Putin, and has for a long time. I think this is different than just a policy switch. A policy switch would be the U.S. is not really going to fund Ukraine the way it has, or we're going to see security guarantees on the aid. This is different than what Trump himself said on Sunday to reporters, which was that he had asked Putin, does he want all of Ukraine? Something to the effect of, does he want all of Ukraine? And that would have caused a lot of problems for us. And he said no. In the last day, Trump is saying that Zelensky better move fast, which sounds like better move fast to accept the deal Trump wants, or he's going to get run over. That's more than a policy switch.
And what's changed in the last day is Zelensky coming out, and he's saying that Trump is surrounded by disinformation and not hearing the truth.
Yeah, and Trump is not fond of Zelensky. I know he keeps saying he is, but according to a number of people in his world, he isn't and hasn't been for a long time. There's, all kinds of historic reasons why. Trump has a vision of Russia from its days as a superpower, and I think that he is looking at it as a more significant country. But this is not something that should surprise anyone. What is striking is just it's not silence from Congress and from Republican senators who had been pretty hawkish on Russia before and who had supported Ukraine, at least to some extent. It's, again, we're back to this gaze aversion from Republicans criticizing Trump. And instead, it's just, no, I don't agree with that word, or I wouldn't say that. And
So, folks, if you want to know why Trump is going into hiding, why he's hiding away, other outlets have talked about this, how Trump has been squirreling away at his golf course even more than usual, is because his numbers are in free fall. The data is against him. This is shocking even in relation to Trump's first term, because Donald Trump always could fall back on at least okay numbers on the economy. Now, guys, I'm not defending it, but the American people, enough of them, frankly, were deluded and maybe stupid enough to believe that the Trump economy was a good economy and that they didn't reelect him for other reasons. And that coming back in this time, his approval was higher than it had ever been for him. Now, still low for an incoming president, but high for Trump. But what we're seeing here, and I predicted this, is that because Trump was not elected, so much as people wanted change and didn't care who delivered it, the numbers were going to break very quickly for him if he didn't fix his number one promise, which was fighting inflation, lowering prices, things like that. And he has not only failed to achieve that, he's actively made it worse. And so, Donald's hiding away because his whole plan is failing. And you want to know why he's just saying random things? Because he has no coherent strategy. The American people, even if they didn't love Joe Biden, even if they wanted an alternative, they do not want what they're getting from Trump.